Hello, friends, and welcome to this deep, heartfelt journey where I, your dedicated narrator and lifelong cinephile, am sitting down with you right here to talk about one of the most electrifying, thought-provoking, and culturally explosive films ever created, Fight Club, the 1999 masterpiece that continues to resonate like no other movie from its era. If you're wondering why on earth you should drop everything and watch this film tonight, or rewatch it with brand new eyes if you've already experienced it, then stay right with me, because I'm going to unfold every single fascinating detail about its creation, its cast, its crew, its production battles, its technical brilliance, its music, its release roller coaster, its awards, its home video revolution, its massive cultural legacy, and all the little behind-the-scenes gems that make it so special. And I promise you, not one single story beat, not one twist, not one surprise will be revealed. This is pure information, pure excitement, pure reasons why this movie deserves your time, delivered in a way that feels like we're chatting over coffee, because that's how passionate I am about sharing why Fight Club is essential viewing in 2026 or any year. By the time we're done, you'll be itching to hit play, and this script is written exactly so you can copy and paste it straight into your text-to-voice tool and let it flow naturally for a full 25-minute experience. Let's start at the very beginning with what makes Fight Club feel timeless from the opening frame. This is a film directed by David Fincher, the cinematic genius who had already wowed audiences with Seven in the Game, and who brought his trademark precision, dark humor, and visual poetry to every single shot. Fincher didn't just direct, he obsessed over every detail to create something that feels both raw and meticulously crafted. The screenplay was written by Jim Uhls, who took the raw power of Chuck Palahniuk's 1996 novel and shaped it into a script that Fincher spent months refining alongside the actors. Palahniuk himself has publicly praised how faithfully and smartly the adaptation captured the spirit of his book while streamlining it beautifully for the screen. The movie was produced by a powerhouse team including Art Linson, Sion Chaffin, and Ross Grayson Bell, with Arnon Milchan serving as executive producer. The production companies were Fox 2000 Pictures, Regency Enterprises, and Linson Films, and 20th Century Fox handled the distribution. Right from the planning stages, this project had ambition written all over it. Now imagine the casting process. It was pure magic. Edward Norton steps into the role of the unnamed narrator with such vulnerability, intelligence, and quiet intensity that you feel every ounce of his inner world through his voiceover and subtle expressions. Norton's performance is the emotional anchor, the one that makes you care deeply and relate instantly. Opposite him, Brad Pitt delivers a career-defining turn as Tyler Durden, bringing explosive charisma, physical perfection, and that dangerous magnetic energy that lights up the screen. Pitt prepared like a method actor on steroids. He trained in boxing, taekwondo, and grappling. Took actual soap-making classes to embody the character fully, and even voluntarily had his front teeth chipped by a dentist for authentic detail. Helena Bonham Carter is absolutely fearless and unforgettable as Marla Singer, injecting the film with chaotic wit, raw sexuality, and heartbreaking humanity that balances the entire story perfectly. Her chemistry with both leads crackles with electricity. Then you have Meatloaf, who brings surprising warmth and presence as Robert Bob Paulson, adding layers of heart that you won't forget. Jared Leto appears as the striking young recruit known as Angel Face, delivering a performance of cool detachment and later intensity that sticks with you. Supporting players round out the world brilliantly: Holt McCallany as the tough mechanic, Zach Grenier as the narrator's corporate boss, Richard Chesler, Ion Bailey as the eager Ricky, Peter Iacangelo as Lou, Tom Gossam Jr. as Detective Stern, Michael Seamus Wiles as the bartender in the neck brace, and dozens more including Richmond Arquette, David Andrews, Christina Cabot, George Maguire, Eugenie Bondurant, Rachel Singer, and a huge ensemble of fighters, support group members, and everyday people who make every background moment feel lived in and real. The casting director, Laurie Mayfield, nailed it. Every face, every line delivery feels authentic to the late 90s world the film inhabits. The actor's preparation was legendary and shows why the performances hit so hard. Everyone dove into fight training to make the physical sequences look brutally real and unchoreographed. Norton reportedly pushed his body to extremes, while Pitt hit the tanning beds and embraced the full lifestyle of his character. Meatloaf even wore specially elevated shoes to match heights during key scenes. These little sacrifices and commitments from the entire cast created a chemistry that feels electric and lived in, the kind that pulls you in and never lets go. That's one big reason to watch. You're not just watching actors, you're watching people who gave everything to make this world believable. Let me paint the full production picture for you because the story behind the camera is almost as compelling as what ended up on screen. The rights to the novel were optioned for a modest $10,000 after producers Ross Grayson Bell and Joshua Donnan fell in love with it through creative table readings using unknown actors to test the material's rhythm. An early budget talk started at around $23 million, but by the time cameras rolled, the figure had climbed to $50 million. And during filming, it ballooned further to a final cost of $63 to $65 million. There were tense moments when financing looked shaky, but after studio executives saw the first 3 weeks of dailies, backers like Arnon Milchan came back on board because the footage was that strong. Filming kicked off in July 1998 and wrapped principal photography in December 1998, a grueling 138 days of shooting across more than 200 locations and 300 scenes, mostly in and around Los Angeles. The exterior of one key house was shot in Wilmington, California, while interiors were constructed on massive sound stages in Century City. Production designer Alex McDowell and his team built over 70 custom sets from scratch, found everything designed to reflect the film's themes of chaos and consumerism in perfect visual harmony. They burned through an astonishing 1,500 rolls of film, 3 times the industry average, because Fincher is famous for doing take after take until every frame is perfect. Cinematographer Jeff Cronenweth captured it all on 35mm with Panavision cameras, creating that signature high-contrast, gritty yet beautiful look that still looks razor-sharp today. Editor James Haygood then wove it into a relentless rhythmic flow that never drags for a second across the 139-minute runtime. Visual effects were revolutionary for 1999 and still hold up beautifully. Supervised by Kevin Todd Hogg and teams at Digital Domain and other houses, the effects include an unforgettable opening title sequence that takes you on a microscopic journey through the human brain using L systems, medical illustrations, ray-traced depth of field, and pullbacks that feel both scientific and nightmarish. Other sequences involved compositing hundreds of still photographs into sweeping 3D cityscapes, months of painstaking work on demolition visuals, and clever subliminal single-frame inserts placed throughout the film for an eerie subconscious effect. Special makeup effects by Rob Bottin and his crew created hyper-realistic bruises, swelling, and injuries using techniques inspired by real boxing matches. One missing cartilage look even drew from the famous Tyson Holyfield fight. Sweat was enhanced with mixtures of Vaseline and mineral water to catch the light just right. And every technical department pushed boundaries, and the result is a film that feels premium and immersive even on modern 4K screens. The sound and music are another huge reason this movie demands to be watched, preferably with good headphones or a solid sound system. Ren Kleiss and the sound team crafted a design that is aggressive, intimate, and perfectly tuned. Every punch, every whisper, every ambient city hum hits with clarity and power. The original score was composed by the Dust Brothers, that legendary duo known for their sample-heavy electronic breakbeat style. Their 16-track score is a sonic masterpiece. Listen for pieces like Who is Tyler Durden? Homework, What is Fight Club? Single Serving Jack, Corporate World, Psycho Boy Jack, Hessel, Raymond K, Medulla Oblongata, Jack's Smirking Revenge, Stealing Fat, and others that blend drum loops, scratches, computerized samples, and industrial textures to mirror the film's chaotic energy and emotional undercurrents. The Dust Brothers' work feels dangerous, hypnotic, and perfectly matched to Fincher's vision. And capping it all off is the unforgettable placement of Where Is My Mind by the Pixies during the climax and end credits, a song choice so perfect it has become legendary and still gives chills every single time. Marketing and release were adventures in themselves. The film premiered at the 56th Venice International Film Festival on September 10, 1999, where audiences were split right down the middle. Some walked out raving, others stunned and debating. Theatrical release in the US came on October 15, 1999. Now, the studio initially planned a summer drop, but shifted to fall after test screenings and post-production polishing. Marketing included clever fake public service announcements and even some protest-style stunts. But executives grew nervous about the provocative tone and restructured the campaign multiple times. It opened in 1,963 theaters, earned $11,035,485 in its first weekend, #1 at the box office, but dropped sharply the following week. Final domestic gross was around $37 million, with international markets adding about $64 million for a worldwide total of roughly $101 million. Solid, but below the studio's high expectations at the time. Critical reception in 1999 was famously polarized, and that's part of what makes the film so enduring. Rotten Tomatoes sits at 81% fresh with an average of 7.4 out of 10 from 185 reviews, while Metacritic gives it a 67 out of 100, generally favorable. Many critics hailed the direction, the performances, the editing, and the bold social commentary. The New York Times praised Fincher's visual flair and warned against misreading the film as simple glorification. Others, like Roger Ebert, who gave it 2 stars, called it visceral and stylish, but felt the philosophy sometimes felt like a masquerade. The Boston Globe loved the early energy, but found later sections explosive in tone. Newsweek admired the technique while calling parts puerile. Time magazine loved the cast, but critiqued some gimmicky elements. At Venice, it was equally loved and hated, with worries about copycat behavior that never really materialized the way feared. And over the years, the consensus has only grown stronger. It now appears on countless Best Films of the 1990s and Greatest Films Ever lists. Empire magazine has ranked it as high as number 10 on their greatest movies of all time. Online Film Critics Society named it among the top 10 of 1999. Awards recognition was modest, but meaningful. It earned a single Academy Award nomination for Best Sound Editing, lost to The Matrix, which was a tough year. Helena Bonham Carter took home the Empire Award for Best British Actress. It received multiple Online Film Critics Society nominations, including Best Film, Best Director for Fincher, Best Actor for Norton, Best Editing, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Ools. The soundtrack itself was nominated for a Brit Award. The film's real trophy came later through home media. The DVD release on June 6th. In 2000, changed everything and turned Fight Club into the defining cult classic of the digital age. Fincher personally supervised the 2-disc special editions, 1 single disc and 1 deluxe 2-disc set packaged in a plain brown cardboard wrapper tied with actual twine, designed to look like something smuggled or homemade. Extras were insane for the time. 4 separate audio commentaries, including Fincher's own, 1 with the cast, 1 with the crew, deleted scenes, behind-the-scenes documentaries, still galleries, trailers, TV spots, and Easter eggs. It won Online Film Critics Society Awards for Best DVD, Best Commentary, and Best Special Features. Entertainment Weekly later called it the #1 essential DVD of all time. Over the first 10 years, it sold more than 6 million copies, generated over $55 million in rentals, and netted the studio an extra $10 million in profit despite the theatrical numbers. VHS followed on October 31, 2000. A Japanese Laserdisc came out in 2000. The Blu-ray arrived November 17, 2009, with graffiti art packaging and even a fake menu screen that plays into the film's spirit. In 2024, a 4K remaster was announced, and censored versions in certain markets were eventually restored. This home video success is legendary. It proved that a theatrical underperformer could become a phenomenon through word of mouth and repeat viewings. Culturally and historically, Fight Club's impact is enormous and still growing. It captured the disillusionment of Generation X at the end of the millennium and speaks even louder today in our hyper-consumer social media world. It has been analyzed in film schools, quoted in dorm rooms, and referenced in music videos, parodied in sketches, and even studied in sociology and psychology classes for its take on modern masculinity, identity, and rebellion against corporate culture. Real-world fight clubs popped up in places like Menlo Park and college campuses, though the film's deeper message is far more nuanced. Tyler Durden became one of cinema's most iconic characters. Empire ranked him 8th greatest movie character ever, and one of his lines sits at number 27 on Premiere's greatest movie quotes. The movie inspired mashups like Ferris Club and even influenced men's groups in evangelical circles looking at discipleship through a new lens. It pioneered the idea that DVDs could resurrect and deepen a film's legacy. In 2009, the New York Times called it the defining cult movie of our time, and that label still fits perfectly. Here are some delicious behind-the-scenes nuggets that will make your viewing even richer. Fincher reportedly hid a Starbucks cup in nearly every single scene as a subtle running joke about consumerism. Subliminal single-frame flashes of Tyler appear early on, planted to mess with your subconscious before you even notice. The famous intimate scene between Pitt and Bonham Carter took 12 full hours to shoot, with motion capture dots covering the actors, so visual effects artists could create still composites. Meatloaf wore 8-inch elevated shoes in certain shots to match Norton's height during their emotional hug. Fincher compared the project to classics like Rebel Without a Cause and The Graduate, Martin seeing it as a story about young people clashing with advertising-saturated society. The entire production used innovative digital techniques that were cutting-edge in 1999 and still impress today. Polaniuk visited the set and loved what he saw. Even the packaging of the DVD was designed to feel chaotic and questioning, mirroring the film's spirit. In China, an altered version existed for a while before the original was restored on streaming platforms. So, why, after all these details, should you watch Fight Club right now? Because it is funny in the darkest way, thrilling in its energy, visually stunning, sonically perfect, and performed with absolute commitment by a Dreamcast. Because David Fincher's direction turns every frame into art. Because the themes of searching for meaning beyond stuff, beyond jobs, beyond the numbness of modern life hit harder than ever in our scrolling, buying, comparing age. Because it will make you laugh out loud 1 minute and sit in stunned silence the next. Because it rewards multiple viewings. You catch new details every time. Because it's a movie that respects your intelligence while entertaining you on the highest level. Because it's a cultural touchstone that helped define 1990s cinema and still feels fresh in 2026. Because once you experience it, you'll understand why so many people call it life-changing in the best possible sense. If you're just joining me, pull up a chair because we're diving even deeper into why Fight Club from 1999 remains one of the most essential, mind-bending, and conversation-sparking films you could possibly watch today. I'm your narrator, your passionate guide through cinema's wild side, and I'm here to keep building on everything we already covered so you get the full, unfiltered picture. Every production secret, every performance nuance, every technical marvel, every cultural ripple, without spoiling a single moment of the story itself. This continuation picks up right where we left off, expanding with more layers of detail, more trivia that makes rewatches addictive, more context on why this movie exploded into legend despite its rocky start, and more reasons it'll grab you by the collar and refuse to let go. We're aiming for that full, immersive 25-minute read-aloud experience, so settle in. Copy-paste this straight into your text-to-voice tool, crank the volume, and let the words flow like a late-night confession. Then, picking up from the cultural impact we were exploring, let's talk about how Fight Club didn't just reflect its time. It predicted ours with eerie accuracy. Released at the tail end of the 90s, a decade drowning in .com hype, endless advertising, and the promise that buying more stuff would somehow fill the void, the film zeroed in on that creeping emptiness so many young men and women felt but couldn't name. It became a mirror for Generation X's quiet rage against soul-crushing corporate jobs, meaningless consumption, and the pressure to conform. Fast forward to now, in our era of endless scrolling, influencer culture, gig economy burnout, and algorithm-driven identities, and those same questions hit even harder. The movie asks, what happens when you realize the things society tells you to chase? The perfect apartment, the right car, the status symbols are just distractions from something deeper. It's not preachy, it's provocative, funny in a twisted way, and visually explosive. That's why people still quote it, still debate it in online forums, still form underground discussion groups about it. It didn't age, it evolved. Now, let's zoom in on some of the juiciest behind-the-scenes stories that make the film feel even more alive. Director David Fincher was relentless in his pursuit of perfection. He famously shot way more footage than most directors, over 1,500 rolls of 35mm film, which is triple the Hollywood average for a feature. That meant actors were pushed to their limits, doing take after take until every line, every glance, every physical movement felt exactly right. And Edward Norton has spoken about how Fincher would keep rolling even after a good take just to capture something unexpected, something raw. Brad Pitt prepared intensely for his role. He learned actual soap-making techniques. Yes, real lie and fat rendering demos happened. Trained rigorously in multiple martial arts, got that golden tan, and even chipped his own teeth temporarily for authenticity. A detail that shows how committed he was to embodying this chaotic, larger-than-life figure. Norton, meanwhile, brought his own intensity from previous roles like in Primal Fear, channeling vulnerability and quiet desperation that grounds the entire story. Their dynamic on set was electric. Intense rehearsals, real physical contact and fight scenes. One early punch was genuinely thrown and landed, adding realism. And a shared understanding that they were making something dangerous and special. Helena Bonham Carter brought her signature fearless energy to her character, embracing the messy, unfiltered humanity without apology. She and Pitt spent long hours filming intimate scenes that required trust and precision. Not glamorous at all behind the scenes, with camera rigs, lighting setups, and endless repositioning. But the result feels raw and charged. Meatloaf, playing a surprisingly tender and heartbreaking supporting role, wore custom prosthetic makeup for his physical appearance and even platform shoes in some scenes to match heights during emotional moments. Jared Leto, in a smaller but striking part, shaved his head and eyebrows for the look, committing fully to the aesthetic. The supporting cast, from Holt McCallany's no-nonsense mechanic to Zach Grenier's smug corporate boss, felt like real people because Fincher cast actors who could disappear into the world he'd built. Production designer Alex McDowell created over 70 custom sets, turning ordinary locations into nightmarish reflections of modern life. The iconic rundown house where much of the action unfolds was partly shot at a real abandoned property on North Neptune Avenue in Wilmington, California, with exteriors capturing that decaying, forgotten vibe. Interiors were built on sound stages in Century City, allowing Fincher to control every detail, peeling wallpaper, mismatched furniture, flickering lights, to make it feel lived in yet symbolic. Cinematographer Jeff Cronenweth used high-contrast lighting, desaturated colors in some scenes, and a gritty texture that makes everything feel urgent and tactile. The fight sequences were choreographed to look messy and real, inspired by actual underground brawls and UFC footage studied by the makeup team to get bruises, swelling, and blood exactly right. No clean Hollywood punches here. Visual effects supervisor Kevin Todd Hogg and his teams at Digital Domain pushed boundaries with the era's tech. The opening sequence is a mind-blowing microscopic dive into neural pathways, using ray tracing, medical diagrams, and seamless pullbacks that feel both clinical and hallucinatory. Subliminal flashes appear throughout, single frames of a figure that tease what's coming without you consciously noticing at first. Demolition and explosion effects were composited meticulously, blending practical pyrotechnics with digital enhancements. Even the sweat on actors was augmented with a Vaseline mineral water mix to catch light dramatically. These weren't flashy CGI showpieces. They served the story's disorienting tone perfectly. The sound design by Ren Kleiss is aggressive and immersive. Punches land with bone-crunching impact. City noise hums underneath dialogue. Whispers feel intimate. The Dust Brothers' score mixes industrial beats, scratched samples, and electronic pulses that mirror the characters' fractured minds. Tracks like This Is Your Life and the use of the Pixies' Where Is My Mind over the end credits have become iconic. That song choice alone elevates the whole experience to something transcendent. The theatrical run was tough. After premiering at Venice on September 10th, 1999, where it got booed by some and stunned others, it opened wide on October 15th in 1,963 theaters, topping the box office with $11,035,485, but dropping sharply afterward, 42.6% in week 2. Domestic total, $37,030,102. International added $63,823,651 to $64,285,678 depending on sources, for a worldwide gross around $101,321,009 against a $63 to $65 million budget. Marketing missteps played a part. Early trailers emphasized action over satire, leading to mismatched expectations. But the real victory came later. The DVD release on June 6, 2000 was revolutionary. Fincher oversaw everything. 2-disc sets with 4 audio commentaries, his own as a masterclass in filmmaking. Deleted scenes, documentaries, galleries, and that infamous plain brown paper packaging tied with twine. It sold millions, over 6 million copies in the first decade, moshed with some reports saying up to 13 million total DVDs, generating massive rental revenue, over $55 million, and extra profit for the studio. Blu-ray in 2009, 4K announcements later, it became the gold standard for special editions. Fincher himself said it paid for itself through home video alone. Awards were sparse but telling. One Oscar nomination for Best Sound Editing to Ren Klyce and Richard Himes, lost to The Matrix in a stacked year. Helena Bonham Carter won the Empire Award for Best British Actress. Online Film Critics Society nods for Best Picture, Director, Actor, Norton, Editing, and Adapted Screenplay. It ranked high on end-of-year lists and later Best Of compilations. Empire placed it among all-time greats. Trivia gems keep piling up. Fincher hid a Starbucks cup in almost every scene as a cheeky jab at consumerism. Golf ball scenes had the actors actually drunk for authenticity. The first on-screen punch was real. Author Chuck Palahniuk visited set and praised the adaptation as streamlined and even better in spots. Real fight clubs inspired by the film appeared, though the movie warns against blind imitation. The themes influenced everything from music videos to men's self-help discussions. So here we are. Why watch Fight Club? Because it's hilarious in its darkness, visceral in its energy, beautiful in its chaos. Because Fincher's vision is unmatched, the cast gives everything. The tech still dazzles, the music pulses through you. Because it challenges consumerism, identity, masculinity, society itself without easy answers. Because it rewards every rewatch with new discoveries. Because in a world that feels increasingly numb, and it screams that feeling something, anything, is better than nothing. Dim the lights, hit play on those 139 minutes of pure intensity, and let it hit you. You might laugh, you might rage, you might rethink everything. But you won't be the same after. Let's keep rolling right into the heart of what makes Fight Club such an unstoppable force of cinema, picking up fresh ground without circling back, diving into more layers of the madness behind the making, the wild energy on set, the clever little touches that reward eagle-eyed viewers, and the long shadow it casts even now. I'm your narrator, here to pour out every fascinating scrap of detail, so when you finally hit play, you'll catch things most people miss on the first go-round, and you'll feel that rush of discovery all over again. This is the kind of movie that doesn't just entertain, it provokes, it sticks, it makes you question the shiny surface of everything around you. So lean in closer, we're not done yet. One of the most brilliant tricks David Fincher pulled was planting those ultra-quick single-frame appearances of Tyler Durden early on. Flashes so brief your brain registers them subconsciously before your eyes catch up. It's a psychological sleight of hand that builds tension without you even knowing why the atmosphere feels off-kilter from the start. Fincher has talked about wanting the film to feel like a fever dream, something that creeps under your skin and stays there. He drew inspiration from classics that captured youthful dislocation, flipping the script on stories like The Graduate where the protagonist faces endless possibilities. Here, it's the opposite. A world with no real paths left, just numbness and the urge to break free. That inversion is what gives the movie its sharp edge and why it resonates so deeply with anyone who's ever felt trapped in the grind. On set, the physical commitment was insane. The makeup team didn't just guess at bruises and cuts, they studied real UFC fights frame by frame to nail the authentic look of swelling, split lips, black eyes, and that raw aftermath. Julie Pierce, the key makeup artist, had never done truly realistic fight damage before, so she poured over footage to get every shade of purple and yellow just right. And those punches? Not all faked. In one early moment outside a bar, now the first real swing landed for real. Edward Norton's fist connected with Brad Pitt's ear by accident during a take that Fincher encouraged to feel genuine. Pitt's reaction is pure instinct, and it adds that unscripted jolt of reality. Later scenes had actors actually getting drunk for authenticity during a golf ball hitting bit. The balls flew wild into the catering truck because no one was sober enough to aim straight. Pitt even chipped a tooth for the role, temporarily, fixed later, and both leads took real soap-making lessons, handling lye and fat to understand the gritty chemistry behind it all. Fincher's perfectionism drove everyone nuts in the best way. He did 38 takes on one intense bar confrontation alone, pushing the actors until the exhaustion felt real. The production spanned 138 grueling days, more than 200 locations, and over 300 scenes, and that staggering 1,500-plus rolls of film, triple the norm, because he refused to settle. Sets were rebuilt obsessively. Over 70 custom builds, from decaying houses to sterile offices, every detail screaming themes of decay and false perfection. The exterior of that crumbling home came from a real abandoned spot in Wilmington, California, while interiors exploded on sound stages with controlled chaos. Flickering bulbs, mismatched junk, layers of grime that told a story without words. The budget tells its own story of faith and risk. Started talks around $23 million, ballooned during filming to $63 to $65 million, as Fincher's vision demanded more. More takes, more effects, more everything. Studio execs got nervous, but early dailies were so electric that backers like Arnon Milchan jumped back in. And Russell Crowe was considered for the charismatic wildcard role before Pitt locked it down at a hefty $17.5 million salary, 7 times Norton's $2.5 million. Other names floated early. Matt Damon, Sean Penn in talks for the narrator spot, various actresses for the chaotic female lead. But the final trio clicked like lightning. Helena Bonham Carter even insisted her makeup be applied left-handed because her character wouldn't care about precision or perfection. Marketing tried to sell it as straight action, but the film defied easy boxes. Premiered at Venice in September 1999 to a wildly divided crowd, some booed, some walked out stunned, Giorgio Armani in the audience among the youngest there. Fincher later joked they called for hides, and the team bolted town laughing. Helena Bonham Carter's mother was one of the few cracking up throughout. Theatrical opened October 15th in nearly 2,000 theaters, hit #1 with $11 million, but legs were short. Second weekend down 42.6%, third down another 48%, closing domestic at $37 million. Overseas fared better at around $64 million, worldwide just over $101 million against that $63 to $65 million cost. Not a blockbuster by studio hopes, but the backlash and debates fueled its legend. Fox chairman Bill Mechanic backed it hard, but the underperformance strained things internally. The real explosion happened post-theater. Home video turned it mythic. That June 2000 DVD, supervised by Fincher, came in plain brown paper wrappers tied with twine, looking like contraband. 4 commentaries, docs, deleted scenes, galleries. It won awards for Best DVD Features. It sold millions, raked in massive rentals, proved a film could resurrect through word of mouth and repeat watches. Blu-ray, 4K restorations followed, censored cuts got fixed. Fincher has said he hasn't rewatched it in decades and doesn't want to. He prefers the memory of the fight to make it. More delicious bits. Starbucks cups hidden in nearly every scene as a sly dig at corporate saturation. Someone even cataloged them all online. The demolition effects mixed practical explosions with digital wizardry. Author Chuck Palahniuk visited set, called the adaptation sharper in places than his book. Real underground fight groups sprang up inspired by it, though the film warns against blind following. Fincher compared it to stories of youth clashing with ad-saturated life, calling it a radical act to spend big studio money on an anti-consumerist rant from a fractured mind. What keeps pulling people back? The dark humor that sneaks up on you, the visual poetry and the grit, the score's pulsing industrial heart, the way it mirrors our own obsessions with stuff, status, escape. It laughs at the absurdity while stabbing at deeper truths. In our age of curated lives and endless ads, it feels prophetic. A wake-up call wrapped in chaos and charisma. Watch it loud, watch it alone, watch it again. Catch the flashes, spot the cups, feel the punches land. It's not just a movie, it's a mirror held up to the parts of us we ignore. We're charging ahead deeper into the electric world of Fight Club. No looking back, no rehashing what we've already unpacked, just fresh layers of intrigue. But clever secrets tucked into the frames, production quirks that show how wild the ride really was, and why this film keeps landing punches in our current moment, 25 plus years on. I'm your narrator, laying it all out so that when you dive in, every detail pops like a hidden flash you weren't expecting. This movie isn't content to just sit there. It sneaks up, rewires your brain, and leaves you buzzing long after the credits roll. Let's keep peeling back the layers. One of the slyest moves in the entire film is how Tyler Durden pops up in those ultra-short subliminal bursts way before his official entrance. Single frames, fractions of a second, designed to hit your subconscious like a whisper you can't quite place. Fincher explained it as a way to make the whole thing feel like your mind is already fracturing, while planting unease that builds without you knowing the source. It's a technique borrowed from old advertising tricks but flipped into something unsettling and brilliant, turning the movie into a psychological puzzle that rewards pausing and rewinding. The physical toll on set was no joke. Actors didn't just train, they lived it. Edward Norton and Brad Pitt both took real lessons in boxing, taekwondo, and grappling, watching endless UFC footage to make every swing and grapple look unpolished and vicious. The makeup crew went forensic, studying actual fight aftermath for bruising timelines, color shifts from fresh red to deep purple, even how skin swells asymmetrically. One key early punch wasn't staged at all. Norton connected solidly with Pitt's ear during that parking lot brawl. And Pitt's startled flinch stayed in because it felt too real to cut. Fincher encouraged that raw edge. He wanted the fights to carry the weight of genuine risk, not choreographed ballet. Helena Bonham Carter added her own chaotic flair. She told the makeup artist, who was right-handed, to apply her eyeshadow with the left hand instead, because her character wouldn't bother with precision or symmetry. It created that slightly off-kilter, lived-in look that fits the messy humanity she brings. Meatloaf's role involved heavy prosthetics for his distinctive build, and he wore lifts in shoes for certain blocking to keep eye lines consistent during vulnerable moments. Jared Leto shaved his head and eyebrows completely, diving into the shaved primal aesthetic that spreads through the group. Fincher's shoot was legendary for its length and intensity. 129 days for Norton, the longest of his career, with endless takes on single lines or reactions. The golf ball scene? They actually got drunk for it. Balls flying everywhere, some smashing into the catering truck because coordination was gone. Pitt chipped a front tooth, temporarily, to match the character's rough edges, and both leads learned real soap production, handling dangerous lye mixtures, to grasp the gritty craft. The DVD extras turned this into a legend of its own. Beyond the 4 commentaries, including one with Fincher solo, one with the cast bantering, and crew deep dives, there are hidden surprises. On Disc 2, in the advertising section, hitting down arrows in certain spots unlocks secret menus or alternate promo spots, including an unused 8 Rules trailer that never aired. Deleted scenes come with on-screen explanations of why they were cut, some for pacing, others for tone. And the packaging itself was genius. Plain brown paper, twine-tied like underground contraband. A fake FBI warning flashes Tyler's face with a scrambled message before the menu, a cheeky nod to the anti-authority vibe. Easter eggs include cropped newspaper bits with absurd headlines like "Missing Monkeys Found Shaved," a subtle wink at the primal head-shaving rituals in the story. In China, years later, streaming versions got altered endings to fit local rules. The chaos cut short, authorities stepping in, which Fincher found ironically close to the book's original close. He distanced himself from how some groups later latched onto Tyler as an idol, saying he's not responsible for misreadings, that symbols evolve and language shifts. And speaking of relevance, this thing hasn't faded, it's sharpened. In the 2020s, with hustle culture, online alpha male gurus, endless scrolling that promises fulfillment through more stuff, and young people feeling the same hollow grind the narrator did, the satire lands harder. It critiques how resentment can twist into something dangerous when funneled into charismatic figures promising escape through destruction. Fincher called it funny and seditious, not sinister, a mirror to how advertising and consumerism sell fake meaning, leaving people searching for anything real, even if it's violent. Discussions rage on about whether it's a warning against toxic masculinity or a snapshot of it. Either way, it forces conversation in dorms, podcasts, and forums. Real groups inspired by it formed, and still do, though the film cautions against literal imitation. Its lines became memes, its aesthetic influenced fashion and fitness obsessions, its questions about identity echo in debates over digital isolation and what manhood even means now. The legacy is messy and massive, polarizing at Venice where some booed and others cheered, underperforming theatrically but exploding on home video because people needed to own it, rewatch it, argue over it. Fincher hasn't revisited it in decades. He prefers the memory of the battle to making it. But for us, it's alive, a dark comedy that laughs at our obsessions while stabbing at deeper truths about emptiness, rebellion, and the search for something authentic in a world selling illusions. So cue it up again, or for the first time. Watch for the flashes, the hidden cups, the flinches that weren't planned. Feel the pulse of the Dust Brothers score, the crunch of sound design, the way every frame drips with intent. It's chaotic, hilarious, brutal, beautiful, a film that doesn't apologize for shaking you. Hit play on those 139 minutes and let it hit back. You might find yourself quoting it tomorrow without meaning to, or questioning the next ad that promises happiness in a box. That's the power here. It doesn't let go. We're pushing forward into even more uncharted corners of Fight Club's universe. Fresh angles, sharper insights, and those lingering echoes that make it impossible to shake off even decades later. I'm your narrator, here to hand you the keys to spots most viewers glide right past. So your next viewing feels like uncovering buried treasure in plain sight. This film isn't static. It's a living thing that shifts depending on when and how you look at it. And right now, in our world of endless feeds and manufactured outrage, its bite feels sharper than ever. Let's talk about the deliberate invasion of corporate logos that creeps into nearly every frame, specifically those Starbucks cups scattered like quiet accusations. David Fincher made it a personal mission to slip one into almost every scene, not as sneaky product placement, but as a visual jab at how deeply branded life had become by the late 90s. You see them on desks, in backgrounds, clutched in hands during mundane moments. A constant subliminal reminder that even in rebellion, the system seeps in. It's not about hating one chain. It's about showing how inescapable consumer saturation is, how it colors every interaction until individuality gets drowned out. Fincher has said the company was surprisingly cool with the satire, letting their logo become a punchline in a film tearing down exactly that kind of empire building. Spot them all, and suddenly the world feels smaller, more suffocating, more accurate to what the characters are raging against. Another layer that hits different on repeat watches: the way the sound design weaponizes silence and noise. Ren Klyce's team didn't just layer punches and city hum. They created pockets of eerie quiet right before chaos erupts, making the violence land harder. Whispers feel invasive, footsteps echo like judgments, and the score from the Dust Brothers pulses like a migraine you can't escape. And it's auditory unease that mirrors the mental unraveling without ever saying it outright. Pair that with the visual tricks. Those subliminal flashes aren't random, they're timed to spike anxiety, making your brain register danger before your conscious mind catches on. Fincher's commentary tracks on the DVD are gold mines of dry wit and brutal honesty. In one, he walks through how he fought to keep the film big-budget and star-driven, while still letting it be an anti-consumerist scream from a fractured psyche. He talks about wanting to capture that late 90s feeling of being sold endless promises that never deliver. Perfect homes, perfect bodies, perfect lives, only to watch it all feel hollow. He compares the project to throwing a grenade into polite society, knowing some would cheer and others would recoil. Listening to him, Pitt. Norton and Bonham Carter together feels like eavesdropping on a therapy session crossed with a war room. They laugh about the exhaustion, the arguments, the moments when the set felt like it might implode from the intensity. The legacy keeps evolving in real time. At 25 years old, discussions rage about whether it's a cautionary tale or an accidental manifesto. Some see it as a mirror to the resentment that fuels online echo chambers, pickup artist rhetoric, and grievance-driven movements, places where charismatic figures promise escape through destruction or dominance. Fincher has been clear, he's not responsible for misreadings, that symbols shift and language mutates, but the core is a diagnosis of emptiness, not a prescription for chaos. In recent interviews, he's distanced himself from idolizing Tyler, then calling it impossible to miss that the character is a negative force. Yet the film keeps getting pulled into debates about modern masculinity, digital isolation, and what happens when young men feel obsolete in a world that promised them everything. It resonates because it doesn't offer easy fixes. It just holds up the mirror and asks what you're going to do with the reflection. Rewatch for the architecture of rebellion, how Project Mayhem starts small, almost playful, then snowballs into something unstoppable. Notice how the group's rituals parody corporate structure, hierarchies, assignments, uniforms of a sort. It's satire that stings because it shows how easily discontent can reorganize into the very systems it hates. The buildings chosen for demolition? They all digital stand-ins for Fox-owned properties, a meta wink at biting the hand that fed the production. The home video revolution deserves another nod in a new light. That 2000 DVD didn't just sell copies. It created a generation of owners who dissected it like scripture. The packaging, brown paper, twine, fake warnings, turned owning it into an act of quiet defiance. People passed discs around dorms, argued over commentaries, hunted Easter eggs. It proved a flop could become immortal through ownership and repeat play, long before streaming made everything disposable. In our current moment, with economic squeezes, identity crises, and endless ads promising meaning through purchases, the questions it raises feel urgent again. What fills the void when jobs numb you, stuff fails to satisfy, and connection feels performative? The film doesn't preach. It provokes laughter in dark places, then leaves you unsettled. It's funny how something so chaotic can feel clarifying, a reminder that feeling lost is human. But building identity on anger alone leads nowhere good. So grab the remote one more time. Hunt those cups, catch the flashes, feel the score throb in your chest. Let the 139 minutes wash over you like a cold shower that wakes you up. This isn't just entertainment. It's a conversation starter, a mirror, a warning wrapped in charisma and bruises. Hit play and see what it stirs in you this time around. The world hasn't changed as much as we'd like to think. But maybe, just maybe, watching it helps you see the cracks a little clearer. We're surging deeper still into the raw, unfiltered essence of Fight Club, uncovering more hidden gems, by production eccentricities, and the ways this film keeps echoing louder in our 2026 reality without circling back to anything we've already covered. I'm your narrator, guiding you through the shadows and sparks that make every frame feel alive and urgent, so your viewing becomes an excavation rather than just watching. This thing doesn't fade, it sharpens with time. And right now it's questions about emptiness, rage, and what we chase in a world that sells us everything but meaning feel almost uncomfortably on point. One of the most mischievous details Fincher baked in was the deliberate avoidance of one particular brand during a key act of destruction. While Starbucks cups litter the background like inescapable corporate wallpaper, the targeted coffee shop that gets wrecked is a fictional Gratifico coffee, not a real chain. It's a subtle but pointed choice. The rebellion isn't about erasing every logo, it's about exposing how the system infiltrates even the spaces meant for escape. Fincher has joked that Starbucks was surprisingly game about their logo becoming a recurring visual gag, almost like they understood the satire was bigger than any one company. Spotting those cups becomes a game. They're on desks during soul-crushing office scenes, clutched in hands during support group monotony, even lurking in the periphery of chaotic moments. A constant quiet reminder that no matter how much you try to break free, the consumer machine is always there, sipping away at your attention. The DVD menu itself is loaded with playful sabotage. Before the main screen loads, a fake FBI warning pops up with Tyler's face distorted and a garbled message that ties straight into the film's anti-authority streak. Hit certain arrows on the advertising extras disc, and secret alternate trailers unlock. One features an unused 8 Rules version that never hit airwaves. Deleted scenes come annotated with Fincher's dry explanations for cuts, pacing issues, tone shifts, moments that felt too on the nose. It's like the disc is rebelling against being a standard special feature, mirroring the movie's refusal to play nice. Fincher's group brainstorming sessions with Pitt, Norton, and screenwriter Jim Uhls were intense creative crucibles. They hammered out the cynicism, refined the voiceover's biting edge, and pushed the anti-materialist rant until it felt dangerously honest. Pitt has spoken about how those talks shaped Tyler's philosophy into something that felt lived in, not preached. The result is dialogue that lands like punches, sharp, quotable, and uncomfortably true to the frustrations of people who grew up promised endless success only to find hollow routines. In recent years, the film's 25th anniversary sparked fresh waves of conversation. A meticulously supervised 4K remaster dropped, letting audiences see the grit and high-contrast visuals in razor-sharp detail for the first time. Companion art books surfaced with unearthed stills, rare set photos, and new interviews digging into its staying power. Critics and fans alike revisited how it anticipated the digital age isolation we live with now. Endless scrolling as the new IKEA catalog, performative identities online replacing real connection, resentment bubbling up in echo chambers. It's not that the movie predicted social media exactly, it's that it nailed the underlying void. The feeling that no amount of likes, followers, or curated perfection fills the hole left by meaning stripped away. The misreadings keep fueling debate. Some latch onto Tyler's charisma as aspirational, ignoring the film's clear framing of him as a destructive illusion. Fincher has been blunt in later reflections. He sees the character as a negative force, a warning about what happens when anger gets charismatic packaging without accountability. Yet the pull remains because the diagnosis rings true. Alienation in a hyper-connected but deeply lonely world. The temptation to burn it all down when nothing feels real. Podcasts dissect it alongside current events. Film schools screen it for discussions on masculinity in crisis, and younger viewers find parallels in their own economic squeezes and identity pressures. The Venice premiere story still circulates as legend. A room full of industry heavyweights mostly recoiled, with one notable exception: Helena Bonham Carter's mother laughing through the whole thing while others sat stunned. Fincher and the cast bolted afterward, half amused, half defiant. That split reaction mirrored what would happen worldwide. Love it or hate it, but you couldn't ignore it. Even the smallest choices carry weight, like how the makeup for injuries evolved from studying real fight footage to layering in realistic progression of bruises over days, not just instant black eyes. Or the way Fincher used practical explosions blended with digital composites for demolitions that feel both visceral and symbolic, tying back to the theme of tearing down false structures. This film rewards obsession because every layer reveals more. The score's industrial throb syncing with heartbeat-like anxiety, the editing rhythms that mimic fractured thoughts, the performances that balance vulnerability and menace. It's chaotic yet precise, hilarious yet harrowing, a mirror that shows us the parts we pretend aren't there. So fire it up once more, or for the first time with all this in your head. Chase those cups through the frames, catch the menu tricks, feel how the questions it asks line up with the world outside your screen. 139 minutes of controlled anarchy that might just clarify something you've been wrestling with. It's not about answers, it's about facing the mess and deciding what comes next. We're plunging even further into the intoxicating underbelly of Fight Club. Fresh revelations, overlooked production quirks, thematic undercurrents that keep resurfacing in today's conversations, and those subtle strokes that turn a viewing into a full-on revelation. I'm your narrator, peeling away more of the film's intricate skin so you walk away with new things to spot, new reasons to feel its pulse, and a stronger urge to experience it all over again. This movie thrives on layers. The more you uncover, the more it demands you confront what's staring back from the mirror. Consider how the subliminal flashes aren't just clever tricks. They're calibrated to mimic advertising's own manipulative playbook. He's inserting Tyler into your mind before the character even speaks a line. Fincher drew from real psychological experiments on subconscious priming, turning the film into a meta-commentary on how brands and ideas burrow into us without permission. Those single-frame inserts spike your unease, making the eventual reveal feel inevitable yet shocking, like your brain was already piecing it together. The breath visible in cold outdoor scenes during one late-night confrontation? Not from the actors shivering on set. It was digitally composited from footage of Leonardo DiCaprio, a sneaky visual fix pulled from another shoot to sell the chill without forcing everyone to freeze for hours. Fincher's team blended it seamlessly, proving how far they'd go for authenticity in even the tiniest details. And author Chuck Palahniuk's spark for the original novel came from a brutal, real-life moment. After getting beaten up at a campsite for complaining about noisy neighbors, he returned to work bruised and battered, only to find colleagues completely ignoring his injuries, chatting about weekends instead. That societal refusal to engage, the fear of real connection, became the seed for the story's exploration of disconnection and suppressed rage. Palahniuk has said the film streamlined his book brilliantly, cutting fat while amplifying the satirical bite. On the set, the intensity sometimes spilled over into pure improvisation. During a tense restaurant confrontation, the punch to the stomach had an unexpected echo. Watch closely, and you'll see the narrator subtly flinch in sympathy, as if feeling the impact himself. It's a tiny, unscripted physical tell that Fincher kept because it added unspoken depth to the bond between characters. Moments like that weren't planned. They emerged from the actor's immersion and Fincher's willingness to let the camera roll until truth appeared. The 4K remaster released around the 25th anniversary sharpened everything to a brutal edge. Colors pop with renewed contrast, grain feels intentional rather than dated, and those subliminal flashes hit even harder on modern screens. Companion books dropped with rare stills, fresh interviews, and behind-the-scenes artifacts, giving fans the deepest archival dive yet into how a big studio gamble became an anti-consumerist grenade. In recent reflections, Fincher has addressed the film's complicated afterlife head-on. He stresses that Tyler isn't a role model, but a cautionary force, narcissistic, destructive, channeling grievance into chaos without real solutions. Yet the movie's diagnosis of alienation, obsolescence, and manufactured outrage keeps proving prescient. In an age of grievance politics, online echo chambers, and performative toughness, its portrait of men rallying around resentment feels eerily current. It captures how easily discontent morphs into something organized and dangerous, parodying corporate ladders while building new ones from anger. The coffee shop demolition stands out as another pointed choice. They torch Gratifico Coffee, a made-up spot, because Starbucks wouldn't allow their real brand to be blown up on screen. The company was fine with their cups appearing as background satire everywhere else. Even embracing the jab at their ubiquity, Fincher called it fun to use the logo relentlessly, not out of personal beef, but to illustrate how inescapable corporate saturation had become. A visual reminder that rebellion still happens inside the system it hates. These details accumulate like bruises. The makeup team's forensic study of real fights for accurate injury progression. The way practical pyrotechnics fused with digital effects to make destruction feel both cathartic and terrifying. The score's relentless industrial heartbeat syncing with mounting tension. Every element serves the film's core question. What happens when numbness turns to fury, and fury finds a charismatic voice? Fire it up with all this rattling in your head. Hunt the subliminals, feel the phantom flinches. Notice how the world outside your screen echoes the one inside. Those 139 minutes aren't just a story. They're a confrontation with the parts of ourselves we numb with stuff, status, and distraction. It might unsettle you, amuse you, anger you, but it won't leave you unchanged. We're tunneling even deeper now into the restless spirit of Fight Club, new corners of its craftsmanship, overlooked production choices that reveal the filmmaker's obsession, thematic threads that keep threading themselves into contemporary arguments, and those quiet, almost invisible decisions that make the whole thing feel dangerously alive. I'm your narrator, handing you more pieces of the puzzle so the next time those opening frames flicker across your screen, you catch layers you never noticed before and feel the film's heartbeat sync up with your own questions about the world we're all trying to navigate. One of the film's sharpest visual metaphors hides in plain sight during the support group sequences. The way the camera lingers on the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting a sickly pallor over everyone gathered. Fincher deliberately chose those harsh institutional fixtures to underline the artificiality of the spaces where people go to feel something real. Sterile rooms full of rehearsed confessions, where vulnerability is performed rather than felt. The lighting never softens, it stays cold and clinical, mirroring how the characters are trapped in systems, medical, corporate, social, that promise healing but deliver only numbness. It's a small but relentless choice that builds the sense of suffocation without a single line of dialogue explaining it. The fight choreography itself evolved during rehearsals in unexpected ways. The team didn't want clean martial arts sequences. They studied grainy bootleg videos of real bare-knuckle brawls in parking lots and backyards, then stripped away any polish. Punches were thrown with loose form, grapples ended in clumsy sprawls, and bodies hit concrete with the kind of thud that comes from lack of technique rather than mastery. Fincher encouraged the actors to let exhaustion show. Heavy breathing, shaky limbs, genuine fatigue. because the point wasn't to glorify violence, but to show it as messy, desperate, and ultimately hollow. One extended basement sequence was shot over multiple nights, now with the cast actually sparring lightly between takes to keep the adrenaline and bruises authentic. Fincher's decision to shoot much of the film on 35mm instead of embracing early digital options gave it a tactile grain that digital remasters have preserved beautifully. In the 4K version, that texture becomes almost three-dimensional. You can feel the sweat, the dust, the cigarette smoke hanging in the air. The high-contrast blacks swallow details and shadows, forcing your eye to search, much like the characters are searching for meaning in a world that keeps everything brightly lit and superficially perfect. The voiceover narration, delivered with Norton's quiet, exhausted precision, was recorded in multiple passes to layer different emotional temperatures. Early takes were flatter, almost detached. Later ones carried more tremor. More sarcasm, more buried rage. Fincher blended them so the tone shifts subtly throughout, reflecting how the narrator's inner world fractures and reforms. It's one of the reasons the monologues feel intimate, like someone leaning in to confess something they've never said aloud before. Recent cultural reappraisals have zeroed in on how the film anticipated the commodification of rebellion itself. Tyler's philosophy gets packaged into slogans, rules, and uniforms, the very things the story rails against. In today's landscape of viral manifestos, branded dissent, and influencers selling anti-establishment lifestyles, that irony cuts deeper. The movie shows how easily outrage can be turned into merchandise, how even destruction can become another product to consume. Fincher has pointed out in passing that the real danger isn't the basement brawls, it's when the ideology starts feeling good because it's shared, organized, and given a name. The practical effects for the collapsing structures blended real pyrotechnics with early CG in ways that still hold up because they prioritized weight and scale over flash. Miniature models were blown up, debris was scattered by fans, then digital artists added falling glass and dust clouds that interacted with the practical smoke. The result feels heavy. Buildings don't just explode, they groan, buckle, and give way like living things reluctantly surrendering. It's destruction with gravity, tying directly to the theme of tearing down illusions that once seemed permanent. And another quiet touch, the way the color palette shifts ever so slightly as the story progresses. Early scenes are dominated by cool blues and grays. The office, the apartment, the support groups, sterile and lifeless. As things spiral, warmer tones creep in. The house's dim lamps, the bar's amber glow, the skin tones during fights. But they're always undercut by shadows and grime. Never fully warm, never fully inviting, just enough heat to remind you what comfort could feel like if it weren't poisoned by everything else. These elements don't shout, they whisper, they bruise, they linger. They turn a single viewing into a conversation that keeps going long after the screen goes black. The film asks you to look at the advertisements, the routines, and the distractions you've normalized, and then it asks what happens when you stop looking away. We're descending even further into the mesmerizing machinery of Fight Club, new facets of its visual language, production decisions that border on obsessive thematic resonances that keep finding fresh echoes in the conversations happening right now, and those understated choices that transform passive watching into something close to personal archaeology. I'm your narrator, offering you more keys to unlock what hides in the corners, so your next encounter with the film feels like returning to a place you've never fully explored. Pay attention to the recurring motif of mirrors and reflections, not just literal ones, but the way surfaces in the film throw distorted versions of people back at them. Bathroom mirrors show bruised, unexhausted faces staring at versions of themselves they barely recognize. Glass tabletops catch fragmented glimpses during tense dinners. Even the polished corporate windows reflect sterile offices like cages of light. Fincher uses these not as obvious symbols, but as quiet accusations. Every time a character looks at their reflection, what they see is already slipping away, already commodified, already hollowed out by the life they're living. The camera rarely lingers on a clean, flattering reflection. Instead, it catches warped angles, partial views, smears of condensation. Anything that reminds you the self is fractured long before the story pushes it to the edge. The editing rhythm deserves its own spotlight. James Haygood cut the film with a nervous pulse, quick cuts during moments of inner turmoil. It longer holds during physical confrontations, so you feel every impact, sudden jumps that mimic how thoughts fracture under stress. There's almost no traditional coverage, no safety shots, no filler angles. Every edit serves the emotional temperature, so when the pace accelerates, your own breathing quickens without you noticing why. Fincher and Haygood reportedly spent months in the editing suite refining those transitions until the film felt like it was breathing on its own, erratic, anxious, alive. One production choice that rarely gets mentioned is the decision to shoot many night exteriors with minimal fill light. The streets and alleys feel genuinely dark. Shadows swallow faces, street lamps create harsh pools rather than even illumination. It forces the eye to work harder, mirroring how the characters are groping through moral and emotional darkness. Practical sodium vapor streetlights were favored over cleaner setups because their orange sodium glow added an unnatural, almost diseased quality to the urban night, a visual parallel to the sickness the narrator feels spreading inside him. The supporting ensemble brings another level of texture most people overlook on first watch. Actors like Holt McCallany, the mechanic with the deadpan wisdom, Zach Grenier, the smug, jargon-spouting boss, and Tom Gossam Jr., the detective who smells something off, deliver performances so lived-in they feel documentary real. Their lines aren't punchy one-liners. They're the kind of mundane workplace dialogue that grinds people down over years. Passive-aggressive, corporate-speak nonsense that makes the narrator's quiet rage feel earned rather than sudden. Fincher cast people who could make boredom terrifying, turning ordinary conversations into slow-motion suffocation. In the years since its release, the film has been folded into academic discussions about late capitalism, digital alienation, and the psychology of radicalization in surprising ways. Scholars have traced how its depiction of men forming a pseudo-fraternity around shared grievance prefigures certain online subcultures, not as endorsement, but as diagnosis. The movie shows the seductive logic of us versus them when isolation becomes unbearable, how a charismatic voice can turn private pain into collective action, and how that action inevitably recreates the hierarchies it claims to destroy. And Fincher has never shied away from saying the film is about the seductive danger of certainty. When someone offers you simple answers to complicated emptiness, run. The practical makeup for the escalating injuries follows a believable timeline that most action films ignore. Early bruises are fresh and purple, later ones fade to sickly yellow-green, swelling peaks then subsides unevenly. The team referenced medical textbooks and boxer recovery photos to map that progression, so the physical toll registers as cumulative rather than reset for each scene. It's a small realism that makes the stakes feel heavier. Bodies don't heal overnight, and neither do minds pushed to breaking. These fragments, the warped reflections, the anxious cutting, the sodium-lit nights, the ensemble's quiet despair, the bruised timeline, aren't flashy. I think they're cumulative. They build a world that feels oppressively real, even when it's tipping into nightmare. The film doesn't explain itself. It infects you with its unease until you're asking the same questions the characters can't escape. So press play with this new map in mind. Look for the mirrors that lie. Feel the edit breathe with you. Notice how darkness isn't just absence of light, but presence of something heavier. Let those 139 minutes seep in again. They might expose cracks you didn't know were there, in the story, in the culture, in yourself. That's where the real power lives, not in explosions, but in the quiet before and after. We're burrowing deeper still into the hypnotic architecture of Fight Club, uncovering fresh architectural choices in the framing, sound choices that operate like invisible strings, raised performance subtleties that reward the closest attention, and the ways the film continues to surface in unexpected corners of culture and criticism today. I'm your narrator, slipping you more hidden switches and pressure points, so the movie keeps unfolding new rooms even after you've seen it a dozen times. Look closely at how Fincher frames faces in close-up throughout. The lens is often slightly wide-angle rather than perfectly telephoto, which introduces just enough subtle distortion at the edges of the frame to make features feel ever so slightly stretched or compressed. It's not cartoonish, but it adds an undercurrent of unease. Faces don't sit comfortably in the frame. They press against the edges, as if the characters are too big for the boxes society has built for them. This choice is especially pronounced in the narrator's apartment scenes and during quiet moments of self-reflection, turning the simple act of looking at someone into something faintly claustrophobic. The sound mix contains another layer most people never consciously register: layered breathing. In many interior scenes, especially the apartment and the decaying house, you hear multiple distinct breathing patterns overlapping. The narrator's shallow, anxious inhales, Tyler's deeper, steadier rhythm, sometimes Marla's irregular cadence drifting in from another room. Ren Klyce's team recorded these separately and wove them into the ambient track, so they feel like a living organism made of breath. When tension builds, the breathing syncs and desyncs in subtle ways, then creating a physiological response in the viewer before the dialogue even escalates. It's body horror disguised as sound design. One of the most understated performance choices comes from Edward Norton's hands. Throughout the film, his fingers are rarely still. They fidget with seams, trace edges of furniture, clench and unclench in pockets. These micro-movements aren't choreographed for drama. They're the restless tics of someone whose nervous system is permanently on low boil. Fincher let the actor keep improvising those small gestures across takes, and the editing preserved the most truthful ones. Watch how those hands evolve. Early on, they're tentative, almost apologetic. Later, they become purposeful, almost predatory. It's a silent arc told entirely through digits. The house itself, that crumbling, a multi-level wreck, was designed with intentional asymmetry. Rooms don't line up logically, hallways bend at odd angles, staircases feel too narrow or too steep. Production designer Alex McDowell and his team built it that way to create a subconscious sense of wrongness. The architecture mirrors the fractured psychology without ever calling attention to itself. When characters move through it, the camera rarely gives establishing shots that let you orient yourself fully. You're always slightly lost, just like they are. Contemporary critics and essayists have started connecting the film to the rise of what some call doomer aesthetics in digital spaces. The fascination with decay, abandoned malls, brutalist ruins, and images of collapse that flood certain corners of the internet. Fight Club didn't invent that visual language, but it crystallized it early. The pleasure taken in watching structures fall, the almost erotic charge of demolition footage, the way ruin can feel liberating when permanence starts to feel like a trap. The movie treats destruction not as spectacle, but as release, and that tension still pulls people in when they scroll through endless videos of crumbling infrastructure or forgotten places. Another production secret lies in the choice of film stock and processing. They pushed the 35mm negative slightly during development, a technique that increases contrast and grain while desaturating colors just enough to make everything feel lived in and slightly unwell. It's why skin tones look pallid in daylight scenes, and why bruises read as deep and ugly rather than theatrical purple. The look isn't glamorous grit, it's clinical decay. Like a body and a society both running a low-grade fever. These quiet decisions, distorted close-ups, overlapping breaths, restless hands, asymmetrical rooms, pushed film stock, don't announce themselves. They accumulate pressure until the film feels like it's pressing back against you. They turn entertainment into something closer to physiology. Your pulse quickens, your shoulders tense, your breathing shallows in unconscious mimicry. We're sinking even further into the shadowed corridors of Fight Club. New threads of visual grammar, sonic sleights of hand, acting choices carved in micro-gestures, and the quiet ways the film keeps resurfacing in today's cultural diagnostics without ever feeling dated. I'm your narrator. I'm sliding you more subtle tools to pry open what remains unseen so the movie keeps revealing new pressure points long after you've memorized the dialogue. Notice how Fincher often positions the camera at or just below eye level in dialogue scenes, a low-angle look that subtly empowers the speaker while making the listener appear diminished or trapped in the frame. When the narrator faces his boss, the angle tilts up toward the superior, reinforcing the power imbalance without a word. Later, when power dynamics flip, the angles level out or reverse. It's a silent hierarchy language that runs parallel to the spoken one, turning every conversation into a visual negotiation of dominance and submission. The Foley work, those everyday sounds amplified just enough to feel invasive, operates like another character. The scratch of a match, like the wet slap of soap being molded, the metallic clink of a spoon against a coffee mug in the support group, the creak of floorboards under weight, all are cranked slightly louder than natural, so ordinary actions feel charged with menace or intimacy. It's not cartoon exaggeration, it's amplification of the mundane until it borders on assault, mirroring how the narrator experiences the world as an overload of meaningless noise until something real, pain, connection, destruction, cuts through. Brad Pitt's physicality carries an entire unspoken monologue in how he occupies space. Early on, Tyler lounges with feline indifference, limbs sprawled, head cocked, taking up more room than necessary as if gravity doesn't apply to him the same way. As the story accelerates, that looseness tightens into coiled readiness. Shoulders squared, I weight forward on the balls of the feet, every movement economical and predatory. Fincher let Pitt calibrate this shift across the shoot so it feels organic rather than acted, a body language arc that tells you the character is becoming more dangerous without ever needing to say it. The film's use of negative space is surgical. Empty frames are never wasted, they're loaded. Wide shots of the sterile IKEA apartment show vast white walls swallowing the tiny human figure. Later, the crowded, decaying house fills every inch with clutter, yet still feels suffocating because the camera rarely gives breathing room. Negative space becomes a metaphor for absence, the missing meaning, the absent purpose, the void that characters keep trying to fill with objects, fights, or ideology. Fincher frames emptiness as aggressively as he frames action. Lately, thinkers have started linking the movie to what some call accelerationist aesthetics, the strange fascination with speeding toward collapse because the current system feels irredeemable. The demolition sequences aren't just spectacle, they carry a dark exhilaration in watching permanence dissolve. In an era of climate anxiety, economic precarity, and institutional distrust, that impulse to tear down and start over, even if the over is undefined, keeps finding new expressions in art, memes, and manifestos. The film doesn't celebrate it, it diagnoses it. But the diagnosis keeps proving accurate. Another buried production detail, the choice to shoot certain fight sequences with multiple cameras running simultaneously at different frame rates. Some takes were captured at 24 frames per second for normal motion, on others at 48 or 60 frames per second for slow motion inserts that could be blended later. This allowed Fincher to intercut real-time brutality with dreamlike slowdowns of impact, a rib cracking, a lip splitting, a fist connecting, turning violence into something both immediate and strangely balletic. The effect is hypnotic and nauseating at once, forcing you to linger on the consequences rather than rush past them. These elements, low-angle power plays, invasive Foley, shifting physical occupation of space, aggressive negative space, frame rate manipulations, work beneath conscious awareness. They don't demand attention, they demand complicity. Your body registers the tension before your mind names it. So cue it up once more with these new lenses. Watch the angles tilt the balance of power, hear the everyday sounds turn hostile. Track how bodies claim or surrender territory, feel the weight of empty space pressing in. Let those 139 minutes settle into your nervous system again. They might unearth a restlessness you've learned to ignore, a hunger for something unscripted, a refusal to keep performing normalcy. We're dropping even lower into the feverish understructure of Fight Club, new veins of cinematographic intent, auditory hallucinations woven into the mix, performance nuances that live in the spaces between lines, and the persistent ways this film keeps getting pulled into fresh dissections of our collective unease. I'm your narrator, feeding you more microscopic tools to dissect what lingers in the margins, so every revisit feels like discovering a parallel version of the same story. Then observe how Fincher frequently employs shallow depth of field in the most intimate exchanges. The background dissolves into creamy buck while the foreground face stays razor sharp. Conversations that should feel close and confessional instead isolate the speaker. The world blurs away until nothing exists except the words being spoken and the face delivering them. It's a visual loneliness trick. Even when two people are inches apart, the shallow focus makes them appear locked in separate universes. During quieter apartment scenes or late-night talks, this technique turns dialogue into something almost claustrophobic. You're forced to stare at the speaker the way the narrator is forced to confront what's being said. In the score's sample work contains another hidden language. Many of the Dust Brothers loops are built from heavily processed fragments of everyday urban noise, distant sirens warped into drones, elevator bells stretched into metallic sighs, footsteps on concrete turned into rhythmic heartbeats. These aren't foreground elements. They're buried deep in the bed of the track, so low you feel them more than hear them. The effect is subliminal unease. Your nervous system registers threat or urgency before your ears identify why. When the music swells during moments of rising tension, those buried samples rise just enough to make your skin prickle without you knowing exactly what triggered it. Edward Norton's eyes carry an arc that almost no one talks about. In the earliest scenes, his gaze is unfocused, drifting, and avoiding direct contact even when speaking to someone. Pupils dilated slightly, as if perpetually overlit or under-rested. As the narrative tightens, the eyes sharpen, pupils contract, focus locks like a predator sighting movement. Blinks become rarer and more deliberate. Fincher reportedly directed the actor to modulate blink rate across the shoot. Fewer blinks signal growing certainty or delusion. More frequent ones betray anxiety leaking through the cracks. It's a physiological tell so subtle it registers on an animal level. You feel the shift in confidence or instability without being able to articulate why. The color timing in post-production pushed certain hues to extremes in ways that feel almost feverish. Reds, blood, bruises, emergency lights are saturated to an almost unreal degree, while greens, institutional walls, are money, envy, lean, sickly, and jaundiced. This isn't random grading, it's emotional coding. Warm reds signal danger, arousal, violence. Cool greens signal sickness, money, artificial calm. The palette never settles into harmony. It's always fighting itself, just like the central consciousness fighting to hold together. Contemporary writers have begun threading the film into larger conversations about doom-scrolling and parasocial rage. The way the narrator consumes media, television, catalogs, self-help tapes, as a form of passive self-harm mirrors how people today scroll feeds filled with outrage bait, luxury porn, and lifestyle propaganda. The movie shows consumption not as pleasure, but as slow poison. The screen becomes a mirror that reflects only lack. In an age where algorithms feed us endless versions of what we lack, the diagnosis feels prophetic. Distraction isn't escape, it's the cage. One last production whisper. Certain wide shots of the city at night were composited from hundreds of still photographs stitched into sweeping digital panoramas. The team spent weeks photographing real Los Angeles buildings at magic hour, then rebuilt the skyline in post so they could control exactly which structures appeared to burn or collapse. It's why the demolitions feel monumental yet personal. The city isn't generic. It's a specific place being unmade piece by piece, mirroring the unmaking happening inside the protagonist. These fragments, shallow focus isolation, buried urban sample drones, evolving blink rate psychology, warring color temperatures, stitched night sky demolitions, don't compete for attention, they conspire. They turn the film into a full-body experience where your eyes, ears, gut, and subconscious all register different alarms at different speeds. So load it fresh with these new receptors active. Track the shallow depth that strands people in their own heads. Feel the ghost noises vibrating under the music. Watch the eyes betray certainty or fracture. Let the reds and greens fight across the screen. Sense the weight of a hand-built collapsing skyline. Allow those 139 minutes to infiltrate again. They might surface a quiet fury you've learned to medicate, a longing for unfiltered contact, a refusal to keep scrolling past the void. We're plunging into yet another stratum of Fight Club's meticulously engineered unease. New angles of lens language, hidden rhythms in the pacing, performance tells buried in posture and timing. And the quiet ways the film continues to be rediscovered as a diagnostic tool for the fractures running through contemporary life. I'm your narrator, equipping you with more precision instruments to cut through the surface so each return trip feels like mapping previously uncharted territory inside the same labyrinth. Fincher frequently deploys what could be called intrusive over-the-shoulder framing. The camera creeps in behind one character so close that the back of their head or shoulder fills half the frame, forcing you to peer over them at whoever they're facing. This isn't neutral observation, it's voyeuristic intrusion. You feel like an uninvited witness to private unraveling. The shoulder acts as a barrier you can't cross, heightening the sense that these conversations are happening in sealed chambers where outsiders, including the audience, don't belong. The technique peaks in moments of confrontation or confession, turning dialogue into something almost suffocatingly intimate, yet permanently separated. The pacing contains another almost imperceptible device: micro pauses inserted right after certain lines land hardest. A beat longer than natural lingers before the cut or the response. Not dramatic silence, just enough extra air to let the words echo inside the viewer's head. Fincher and editor James Haygood calibrated these micro holds during the final conform, so the rhythm feels slightly off-kilter, mimicking how real emotional shocks create tiny delays in processing. You don't notice the extra half-second consciously, but your nervous system does. It stretches the moment until discomfort becomes part of the texture. Helena Bonham Carter's physical performance carries a masterclass in contradictory signals. Her posture is loose and careless, slouched shoulders, head tilted at odd angles, cigarette dangling as if gravity forgot about it. Yet her eyes are locked and predatory, tracking every movement in the room with unnerving focus. The body says, "I don't care." The gaze says, "I see everything." Fincher encouraged her to play that dissonance deliberately. The character's chaos is never random. It's weaponized indifference. Watch how she occupies doorways or leans against walls, always slightly blocking paths, always claiming space without effort, a silent territorial claim that never needs to be spoken. The film's recurring use of overhead angles during moments of surveillance or judgment deserves attention. Cameras crane high above support group circles, corporate boardrooms, or basement gatherings, looking straight down like security footage or a detached God's eye view. These shots strip away individuality. People become patterns, clusters, anonymous bodies performing rituals. The high angle dehumanizes just enough to remind you that the system's watching, in insurance companies, employers, society itself. See participants as data points rather than souls. When the angle drops back to eye level later, the shift feels like a sudden return to messy humanity, relief and threat at the same time. In recent years, the film has been pulled into discussions around quiet quitting and lying flat movements, generational responses to burnout and disillusionment that echo the narrator's initial withdrawal from the corporate machine. Where earlier readings focused on rage and explosion, newer ones highlight the early half, the numb compliance, the catalog shopping as self-soothing, the exhaustion disguised as routine. The movie captures the moment before revolt, when opting out feels like the only remaining power move, and shows how fragile that withdrawal can be when emptiness refuses to stay quiet. One final production whisper from the trenches. Certain scenes involving mirrors or reflective surfaces were shot with the glass removed and replaced digitally in post to eliminate unwanted reflections of crew or equipment. Note the result is unnaturally clean reflections. No stray lights, no camera ghosts, which makes the mirrored selves feel even more artificial and idealized, underlining how the characters are chasing versions of themselves that only exist in advertisements and fantasies. These mechanisms, intrusive over-the-shoulder closeness, calibrated micro-pauses, contradictory body-eye signals, dehumanizing overheads, digitally purified reflections, operate like slow-drip toxins. They don't demand notice. They accumulate until the entire experience feels physiologically wrong in the most compelling way. So, step back into it with these new sensors live. Feel the camera breathing down necks, count the extra half beats after devastating lines, read the war between slouch and stare, sense the cold distance of overhead judgment. And question why every mirror looks too perfect. Permit those 139 minutes to infiltrate once more. They may dredge up a familiar exhaustion you've normalized, a flicker of defiance you've buried, a refusal to keep pretending the surface is enough. We're tunneling deeper yet into the obsessive circuitry of Fight Club, new filaments of spatial psychology, sound layering that borders on synesthesia, performance microbeats that speak louder than dialogue, and the persistent pull this film exerts on fresh generations trying to name their own dislocation. I'm your narrator, slipping you more surgical tools to slice open what stays submerged so the movie keeps mutating under your gaze, revealing new pressure points with every pass. Fincher's blocking of bodies in space follows an almost architectural logic of alienation. And characters rarely share the same plane within the frame for long. One is always foreground, another background, separated by depth rather than side-to-side distance. Even in two shots, the actors are staggered, one closer to camera, one receded, so eye lines never quite meet head-on. The result is visual disconnection. People talk at each other across gulfs of empty air, never truly occupying the same reality. This spatial choreography turns every interaction into a diagram of emotional distance. The closer someone gets physically, the more the frame emphasizes how far apart they still are. The soundscape hides another layer of psychological warfare, reversed or time-stretched vocal fragments buried so low they're felt rather than heard. Tiny snippets of dialogue, a single word, a gasp, "I might laugh," are occasionally flipped backward and dropped into the mix at subaudible levels during moments of mental fracture. These ghost sounds don't register as language. They register as disturbance, like the subconscious replaying trauma it can't process. The Dust Brothers and Ren Kleiss team crafted these whispers to mimic how intrusive thoughts loop and distort inside a racing mind. You don't hear them so much as you experience a sudden tightening in your chest without knowing the trigger. Jared Leto's brief but razor-sharp appearance carries a whole silent narrative in his stillness. Angel Face stands unnaturally rigid amid chaos, spine straight, shoulders back, chin level, as if his body has been trained to military precision even while his face remains eerily blank. The contrast is chilling. Perfect posture in a world of deliberate wreckage. Fincher directed him to hold that statue-like composure as a counterpoint to the escalating mess around him. A visual reminder that fanaticism often wears the mask of discipline. Watch how he barely blinks when violence erupts nearby. The lack of flinch becomes more unsettling than any scream. The recurring motif of falling, objects, people, buildings is choreographed with deliberate asymmetry. Nothing drops straight down. Trajectories arc, spin, tumble unevenly. A dropped lighter cartwheels, a body crumples at an odd angle. Collapsing structures shear sideways before plunging. This refusal of clean verticality mirrors the refusal of clean narratives or easy resolutions. Gravity in this world is capricious, unreliable, just like meaning, just like identity. And the camera follows these falls in long, unbroken takes, letting you track the unpredictable path until impact, so the inevitability feels earned rather than abrupt. Recent academic and online threads have started mapping the film onto what some call post-ironic sincerity, the strange cultural moment where cynicism is so total that earnestness itself becomes suspect, yet people still crave something authentic beneath the sarcasm. The narrator begins in total ironic detachment, catalogs, self-help, deadpan voiceover, then crashes through irony into raw, dangerous sincerity, only to discover that sincerity weaponized is just another trap. In an internet saturated with layered memes, performative detachment, and endless self-aware irony, the movie's trajectory feels like a warning label. When everything is joked about, nothing can be believed, and belief becomes the most dangerous drug of all. One more production artifact worth noting. Certain close-ups of hands manipulating objects, soap bars, guns, chemical mixtures, were shot with macro lenses normally used for product photography. The extreme magnification turns everyday items into alien artifacts, pores in skin, bubbles in lye, striations in fat, making the tactile world feel both hyper-real and grotesque. Fincher wanted the audience to feel the materiality of these things the way the characters do, not as abstractions, but as visceral, messy substances that stain and burn. These strands, staggered spatial separation, reversed vocal ghosts, rigid phonetic stillness, asymmetrical falls, macro-tactile close-ups, weave together into something that operates below rational analysis. They bypass explanation and go straight to physiology. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, a vague sense that the room has grown smaller. So return to it once more with these new scalpels sharpened. Sense the gulfs between bodies even when they're close. Catch the backward whispers under the dialogue. Clock the statue posture amid frenzy. Follow every crooked fall to its jagged end. Feel the grotesque intimacy of magnified skin and soap. Give those 139 minutes permission to work on you again. They may dredge up a cynicism you've worn like armor, a buried wish for unironic feeling, a fear that sincerity might be the last taboo left. We're drilling deeper still into the fever dream mechanics of Fight Club. New currents of compositional tension, auditory slights that play on peripheral perception, number acting choices etched in the smallest muscular twitches, and the evolving ways this film keeps being refracted through the lens of our accelerating algorithm-fed present. I'm your narrator, pressing more delicate probes into the seams so the movie continues to split open in unexpected directions with every fresh encounter. Fincher's lens choices often favor a subtle barrel distortion on wider interiors, not the fisheye warp of older cinema, but a gentle bowing at the edges that makes rooms feel slightly convex, as if the walls are breathing in on the occupants. This optical bend is most noticeable in the apartment and the support group halls. Space doesn't recede cleanly, it curves toward the center, compressing people into the frame's gravitational pull. The effect is subliminal claustrophobia. Even vast white rooms feel like they're slowly tightening around the body inside them. It's architecture behaving like anxiety made visible. The mix contains fleeting instances of what sound designers call phase cancellation artifacts. Brief moments where two similar frequencies, a low hum from the city outside, a matching drone in the score, are inverted against each other just enough to create tiny pockets of unnatural silence or sucking vacuum. These phase dips happen unpredictably during transitions between scenes or right after a line lands heavily. You don't hear a sound being removed. You feel a sudden absence of pressure in your ears, like the room momentarily depressurized. It's a physiological trick that mimics the disorientation of dissociation. The world drops volume for a heartbeat, then rushes back. Meatloaf's portrayal of Bob carries an entire unspoken history in the way he modulates his breathing rhythm. In group scenes, his inhales are shallow and rapid at first, betraying chronic nervousness. As he finds belonging in the chaos, the pattern slows and deepens into something almost meditative. Fincher let the actor control this shift organically across takes. No direction to breathe differently, just permission to let the character's emotional arc live in the lungs. The change is so gradual, you feel it in your own chest before you see it on screen. Tension easing, then replaced by something heavier and more committed. The film's repeated use of Dutch angles, slight canted horizons, is reserved for moments of psychological tipping points rather than generic unease. The tilt is never extreme. It's a mere 5 to 10 degrees, just enough to make level ground feel unreliable. Doorways lean, tabletops slope, city skylines tilt like they're sliding off the edge of the world. These cants appear most often during the narrator's internal monologues or right after a revelation hits. The frame itself refuses stability, mirroring a mind that can no longer trust its own orientation. Lately, the movie has been resurfacing in conversations around context collapse, the digital phenomenon where every space, work, friends, strangers, self-presentation, flattens into one continuous feed. The narrator's life is already a form of context collapse. Job, condo, support groups, insomnia, all bleeding into each other without boundaries. Tyler's arrival shatters that flatness by forcing violent separation, real physical risk, real confrontation. But the film shows how even that rebellion can be reabsorbed into new performance. In a world where every interaction is potentially recorded, monetized, or memed, the craving for unshareable, unfiltered experience feels more urgent than ever. One additional craft note from the trenches: select night exteriors were lit with sodium vapor practicals supplemented by hidden blue-gelled fill lights to create an unnatural cyan-orange split. The orange comes from the street lamps, real urban decay glow. The blue fill keeps faces readable without washing out the mood. Now the result is skin tones that look simultaneously jaundiced and bruised, a visual metaphor for bodies caught between toxic warmth, consumer comfort, and cold alienation. The split never resolves. Faces stay bichromatic, never fully one thing or the other. These currents, barrel curved compression, phase vacuum dips, breath rhythm arcs, restrained Dutch tilts, cyan-orange skin splits, don't compete. They resonate. They turn the film into a tuning fork struck against your own nervous system, setting up harmonics you feel long after the last frame fades. We're sinking into yet another hidden stratum of Fight Club. Fresh veins of temporal manipulation, auditory spatial tricks, performance choices carved into micro-timing and restraint. And the quiet ways this film continues to be rediscovered as a kind of cultural seismograph for the tremors running through our hyper-mediated, always-on era. I'm your narrator, threading more delicate filaments through the structure so the movie keeps yielding new fractures and new light with every descent. Fincher manipulates perceived time in subtle, almost subliminal ways through variable shutter angles. Many action sequences and quick emotional cuts use a narrower shutter, closer to 90 degrees instead of the standard 180. which creates a slightly stroboscopic, choppier motion that feels more urgent and less fluid. The punches, the frantic walking through crowds, the rapid-fire voiceover montages all carry this micro-stutter. Not overt slow motion, but a nervous flicker that makes time feel brittle, like it's about to snap. The technique is most pronounced when the narrator's insomnia peaks, or when chaos accelerates. The world doesn't just speed up, it starts to skip frames, mirroring a mind that's losing its grip on continuity. The surround mix deploys another stealth weapon, localized low-frequency rumbles that move through the room rather than stay centered. During certain basement scenes or demolition buildups, sub-bass tones pan slowly from left to right or front to back, not as obvious sound effects, but as infrasound-like pressure waves you feel in your diaphragm more than your ears. These migrating lows create a physical sense of instability, as if the floor itself is shifting beneath you. And Ren Kleise's team calibrated them to hover just at the edge of audibility, so they register as anxiety rather than music. Your body senses danger moving around you before your brain can name it. Richmond Arquette's small role as the bruised, jittery member of the group carries a masterclass in restrained terror through facial micro-expressions. His smiles are too wide, held too long with tiny twitches at the corners that never quite resolve into genuine warmth. Fincher directed him to suppress natural blinking during these moments of forced camaraderie. The result is a stare that's simultaneously pleading and vacant, like someone trying to convince both himself and others that everything is fine while everything is clearly unraveling. The performance lives in those almost imperceptible tremors around the eyes and mouth. It's fear pretending to be enthusiasm, and it infects every group scene he's in without ever raising his voice. The film repeatedly uses extreme wide-angle lenses for establishing shots of corporate environments. Boardrooms, lobbies, the narrator's sterile condo, creating a barrel distortion that makes ceilings appear lower and walls seem to lean inward. The effect is subtle but cumulative. These spaces, meant to represent power and permanence, instead feel oppressive and slightly warped, as if the architecture itself is complicit in the suffocation. When the lens later opens up in the decaying house or open streets, the shift from compressed to expansive feels like a sudden intake of breath, freedom, but the kind that comes with vertigo. But in the current cultural moment, the movie keeps being pulled into analyses of performative precarity, the way people broadcast their exhaustion, alienation, and quiet rage as a form of currency online. The narrator's early voiceover monologues, dry, self-aware, detailing the minutiae of his numbed routine, read today like proto-Twitter threads or late-night subreddit posts, cataloging symptoms without expecting cure, turning personal collapse into content. The film shows how that performance can metastasize into something more dangerous when it finds an audience and a leader figure. In an attention economy where vulnerability is monetized and rage is algorithmic rocket fuel, the trajectory from ironic detachment to explosive sincerity feels less like fiction and more like a recurring pattern. Then one last craft whisper from the vault. Select transition wipes and dissolves were timed to the exact rhythm of the narrator's breathing in the preceding shot. When he exhales sharply after a line or a revelation, the cut or fade often lands on that release of air, a visual punctuation synced to physiology. The technique is invisible unless you're listening for it, but it creates an unconscious sense of continuity between mind and edit, as if the film itself is breathing with the character. These threads, brittle shutter flicker, roaming sub-bass pressure, suppressed blink terror, barrel-oppressed corporate space, breath-synced transitions, don't shout for attention. They resonate at different frequencies, turning the viewing experience into a full-spectrum physiological event where pulse, breath, skin, and subconscious all start to vibrate in sympathy. So return to it once more with these new dials tuned. Feel time stutter under pressure, track the low tones circling the room, read the smile that never settles, sense ceilings pressing down in boardrooms, notice cuts that land on exhaled breath. Let those 139 minutes course through you again. They may unearth a recognition of how you've learned to perform your own exhaustion, a flicker of dread at how easily detachment curdles into something sharper, a quiet refusal to keep broadcasting the void instead of filling it. We're carving yet another layer deeper into the intricate nervous system of Fight Club. New currents of compositional asymmetry, sonic spatial illusions, performance subtleties encoded in the cadence of silence, and the persistent ways this film continues to be refracted through the accelerating distortions of our always connected, perpetually surveilled reality. I'm your narrator, threading more fine-gauge wires into the framework so the movie keeps disclosing previously concealed chambers and new echoes with every return visit. Fincher's compositions frequently employ deliberate off-center framing that leaves one side of the screen heavier than the other, an asymmetrical weight that pulls the eye toward imbalance. In office scenes, the boss or the cubicle grid sits slightly left of center, while the narrator drifts right, creating a visual tug-of-war that mirrors the internal power struggle. During quieter domestic moments, the furniture or doorways lean one way while the human figure counters the other. The imbalance is never extreme enough to feel gimmicky. It's just enough to make harmony feel impossible. The frame itself refuses equilibrium, training you to sense discord even when the shot looks deceptively calm. The sound design introduces fleeting binaural panning tricks during the narrator's insomnia montages. Certain whispers, ticking clocks, or distant traffic noises drift from one ear to the other in a slow, nauseating arc that mimics the disorientation of sleepless vertigo. These movements are timed to the exact rhythm of eye saccades, the tiny jumps your eyes make when scanning in low light, so the audio feels synced to your own physiology rather than the picture. The effect is subtle vertigo. Your inner ear registers motion that the image doesn't fully explain, creating a mismatch that heightens the sense of a mind slipping its moorings. Zach Grenier's corporate superior delivers lines with micro-pauses placed at unnatural points, a half-beat hesitation right before a condescending adjective or a patronizing you, turning ordinary managerial speak into something faintly sadistic. Fincher encouraged him to treat every sentence like a scalpel. Cut, pause, cut deeper. The rhythm makes the dialogue feel weaponized. The silence after, "I'm sure you're doing everything you can," hangs like a guillotine blade that never quite falls. It's verbal, slow-dripping cruelty, and it makes the narrator's eventual eruption feel not just justified, but inevitable. The recurring visual motif of containment, glass walls, fish tank offices, plastic-wrapped furniture, even the tight framing of support group circles, builds a cumulative sense of being observed and preserved like specimens. Fincher shoots these enclosures with slight telephoto compression, so distances appear flattened. People inside glass rooms seem closer to the walls than they are, trapped in 2 dimensions while the camera remains free in 3. The effect is panoptic. You feel the weight of unseen watchers, even when no one is visibly looking. Later, when containment breaks, shattered windows, torn upholstery, open streets, the release feels explosive because the film has spent so long teaching you what enclosure costs. Contemporary readings have begun connecting the film to the phenomenon of contextual overload, the cognitive state where too many overlapping inputs, notifications, ads, identities, in crises, produce paralysis rather than action. The narrator's early life is contextual overload incarnate. Job, condo, self-help tapes, airplane meals, all arriving in relentless parallel streams until the brain short-circuits into insomnia and dissociation. Tyler's solution is brutal simplification. Reduce everything to pain, fight, project. But the movie shows how that reduction quickly spawns its own overload of rules, assignments, and spectacle. In an era where every app, every feed, every identity layer piles on more context without relief, the craving for radical subtraction feels both understandable and terrifying. One additional production detail worth savoring. Select high-speed sequences, running through streets, frantic packing, demolition countdowns, were shot on 35mm with the film deliberately undercranked at 18 or 16 frames per second rather than the standard 24. When projected at normal speed, the motion appears slightly accelerated and jittery. Not cartoon fast, but unnaturally urgent, like time itself is slipping gears. The technique gives those bursts a documentary urgency that digital high frame rate smoothness could never replicate. The world feels like it's racing ahead of the mind, trying to keep up. These filaments, weighted asymmetry pulling at the edges, binaural vertigo drifting through headphones, hesitation-timed verbal cuts, flattened containment enclosures, undercranked urgency, don't clamor for notice. They hum in sympathy with one another, turning the film into a resonant chamber where your own pulse, breath, and balance become part of the instrumentation. So step back into the current with these new tunings engaged. Feel the frame's unequal tug. Let the whispers circle your skull. Clock the pauses that sharpen cruelty. Sense the compression of glass cages. Notice time stutter when panic accelerates. Permit those 139 minutes to flow through your system once more. They may surface a familiar overload you've learned to endure, a buried impulse to subtract everything until something real remains, a quiet apprehension that simplicity is just another mask danger wears. We're burrowing into yet another concealed stratum of Fight Club, new threads of kinetic framing, sonic micro-events that masquerade as ambience, performance choices distilled into the cadence of restraint, and the quiet ways this film keeps resurfacing as a kind of forensic map for the fractures spreading through our hyper-accelerated, perpetually quantified present. I'm your narrator, sliding more hair-thin probes into the architecture, so the movie continues to disclose previously sealed chambers and fresh resonances with every renewed gaze. Fincher's camera movement often employs what could be called creeping dolly, imperceptibly slow forward or backward tracks that begin and end within a single line of dialogue or a held glance. These micro-dollies are timed to the exact rhythm of the speaker's breath or the listener's swallow, so the lens drifts closer just as tension peaks or recedes. The motion is never flashy. It's barely perceptible unless you're attuned to it. And yet it creates a visceral sense of intrusion or withdrawal. The camera itself behaves like an anxious observer inching toward or retreating from the emotional heat. In office confrontations or late-night apartment exchanges, this creeping approach turns static dialogue into something faintly predatory, as if the frame is stalking the truth the characters won't say aloud. The soundscape harbors fleeting harmonic nodes, brief instances where two or more tones from the score and environment lock into perfect consonance before one suddenly drops out, leaving a hollow afterring. These nodes occur most often during moments of false calm, the narrator staring at his catalog-perfect furniture, a support group circle breathing in unison, the house settling after a fight. The consonance feels momentarily soothing, almost euphoric. The abrupt dropout snaps the illusion, leaving only reverb decay. The Dust Brothers and Ren Kleiss engineered these cancellations to mimic the physiological drop that follows adrenaline. The body relaxes for a heartbeat, then realizes the danger hasn't passed. You feel the drop in your sternum before your ears register why. Holt McCallany's mechanic character communicates an entire worldview through the deliberate economy of his gestures. He rarely moves more than necessary. A slow tilt of the head, a single raised eyebrow, fingers drumming once on a table before going still. Fincher instructed him to treat every action as if it cost something irreplaceable. The restraint makes the few movements he allows feel monumental. When he finally steps forward or places a hand on a shoulder, the gesture lands with disproportionate weight because the film has starved you of excess motion. It's minimalism weaponized into presence, a reminder that real authority doesn't need to fill space, it occupies it. The recurring visual pattern of concentric framing, on doorways within doorways, windows inside rooms, mirrors reflecting other mirrors, builds a subtle sense of infinite regression. Fincher shoots these nested rectangles with precise alignment so the eye is pulled deeper and deeper into the composition, as if the characters are trapped inside ever smaller versions of the same reality. The effect peaks in the decaying house where rooms open onto other rooms in endless recession. The deeper you look, the more the architecture feels like a recursive trap. It's a visual metaphor for identity collapsing inward. Each layer peeled away reveals only another version of the same hollow core. Contemporary reflections have started positioning the film as an early artifact of what some call surveillance subjectivity, the internalized awareness that every moment is potentially watched, recorded, judged. The narrator lives under constant self-surveillance long before Tyler appears, measuring his life against catalogs, insurance forms, airline safety cards. The movie shows how that gaze turns outward into paranoia and then into spectacle. In our present, where every phone is a camera, every interaction a potential post, every breakdown a possible viral clip, the narrator's journey from private numbness to public performance feels less like satire and more like a recurring script we're all improvising. One further production whisper from the cutting room. Select montages were assembled using jump dissolves, ultra-short dissolves, 4 to 6 frames, that create a stuttering overlap rather than smooth blending. These microdissolves appear during insomnia sequences, packing montages, and the accelerating chaos of Project Mayhem, giving the transitions a nervous flicker that feels like memory skipping or perception glitching. The technique avoids the dreamy softness of longer dissolves. Instead, it mimics the fragmented way an overtired brain stitches events together. The world doesn't fade gracefully, it stutters forward. These currents, creeping dolly intrusion, harmonic dropouts, eye gesture austerity, concentric recursive traps, stuttering jump dissolves, don't demand spotlight. They interlock at subrational frequencies, turning the film into a living circuit where your own attention, breath, posture, and temporal sense become unwitting components. So slip back into the flow with these new circuits engaged. Track the lens creeping on breath rhythm. Feel the consonants snap into hollow silence. Register the weight of every withheld gesture. Sense the infinite boxes inside boxes. Notice transitions that glitch rather than glide. Let those 139 minutes thread through you once more. They may lift a veil on the constant self-watching you've normalized, a flicker of exhaustion at performing for an audience that never arrives, a buried impulse to break the recursive loop before it closes completely. Then we're slicing into yet another concealed stratum of Fight Club. New vectors of chromatic dissonance, auditory microdissonance, performance restraint distilled into the architecture of posture, and the quiet ways this film keeps being rediscovered as a kind of shadow blueprint for the contradictions pulsing through our hyper-visible, endlessly self-documented age. I'm your narrator, threading more filament-thin sensors into the grid so the movie continues to yield previously locked frequencies and fresh harmonics with every renewed immersion. Fincher's color timing introduces deliberate chromatic dissonance in transitional moments. A single frame or two will flash an oversaturated complementary hue, a brief violet after a yellow-lit corridor, a cyan ghost after a blood-red explosion, before snapping back to the dominant palette. These microflashes are timed to emotional pivots or sudden cuts, so brief they're almost subliminal, yet they create a retinal afterimage that lingers for a heartbeat. The effect is a visual stutter. The eye registers a color that isn't there, mirroring the way suppressed feelings leak into perception. The dissonance never resolves, it simply leaves a faint chromatic bruise on the mind. The sound design conceals another layer of microdissonance. Certain ambient tones, distant air conditioning hum, low-frequency city rumble, are periodically detuned by a few cents against the score's root note, creating fleeting beats of interference that register as a subtle throbbing pressure rather than audible sound. But these detunings occur most often during the narrator's solitary apartment scenes or right before a fight erupts. The world feels momentarily out of tune with itself. The technique exploits the ear's sensitivity to beat frequencies. You don't hear two separate notes, you feel a pulsing unease in your skull that syncs with rising tension. It's auditory unease engineered at the edge of perception. Ion Bailey's Ricky character communicates an entire arc of blind devotion through the precise calibration of his head tilts. Early on, his head cocks at sharp, eager angles, almost puppy-like curiosity when listening to instructions. As commitment deepens, the tilts become slower, more deliberate, almost reverential, like a disciple absorbing doctrine. Fincher directed him to treat the head as an antenna, angle it to receive, then lock it in place as belief solidifies. The progression is so gradual, it registers kinesthetically. You feel the shift from open receptivity to rigid alignment without ever needing dialogue to explain it. The film's repeated use of foreground obstruction, door frames, stair railings, shoulders, even falling debris, creates a constant sense of blocked sightlines. Fincher shoots these obstructions slightly out of focus so they don't dominate, but they always partially eclipse the subject. The viewer is forced to peer around or through something to see clearly, mimicking the way the narrator's view of reality is constantly interrupted by objects, routines, and other people. When a clear, unobstructed shot finally arrives, often during moments of violence or revelation, when the sudden visual freedom feels almost shocking, like emerging from underwater into air. Recent cultural threads have begun framing the movie as an early portrait of authenticity exhaustion, the fatigue that sets in when every gesture, every confession, every breakdown must be performed with ironic distance to be taken seriously. The narrator starts in total performative numbness, the deadpan catalog narration, the rehearsed support group lines. then crashes through irony into raw sincerity, only to watch sincerity itself become another role to play. In a present saturated with curated vulnerability, rage-bait content, and authenticity as branding, the film's arc feels like a warning. When real feeling is indistinguishable from performance, the only remaining escape is either total withdrawal or total destruction. Yeah, one further craft artifact from the vault: select handheld shots during basement fights were deliberately walked with uneven steps. The operator's footfalls were timed to land slightly off-rhythm with the punches, creating a micro-stagger in the frame that feels like the camera itself is being hit. The technique avoids the polished shake of modern action. Instead, it gives the impression of a documentarian caught in the melee, trying to keep up while getting knocked around. The resulting instability makes the violence feel documentary immediate rather than choreographed. These strands, chromatic retinal bruises, detuned interference throbs, head tilt devotion arcs, constant foreground obstruction, staggered handheld stagger, don't vie for attention. They interweave at sub-perceptual thresholds, turning the film into a living resonator where your own retina, cochlea, vestibular sense, and kinesthetic awareness become unwitting participants. So sink back into the stream with these new resonances activated. Catch the flash of impossible colors, feel the throbbing detune in your temples, track the head's slow lock into belief, peer around every blocking rail or shoulder, sense the camera reeling from unseen blows. Allow those 139 minutes to course through you once more. They may surface a recognition of how you've learned to perform your own authenticity, a weariness at the endless irony loop, a quiet terror that the only unperformable thing left might be silence itself. We're pressing deeper still into the restless marrow of Fight Club. New strands of spatial compression, auditory phantom harmonics, performance choices etched into the geometry of stillness, and the quiet ways this film keeps emerging as a kind of dark compass for the contradictions threading through our endlessly tracked, perpetually gamified existence. I'm your narrator, feeding more microscopic currents into the grid so the movie continues to disclose hidden junctions and new resonances every time the lights drop. Fincher's spatial blocking often employs a technique of lateral compression. Characters are frequently placed near the vertical edges of the frame rather than centered, with wide negative space in the middle pulling the eye outward before snapping back. In office corridors or apartment hallways, the figures hug the left or right margin, while the center remains empty air, a visual vacuum that makes proximity feel impossible, even when people are physically close. The composition creates a constant sense of separation by distance rather than barrier. The characters share the same room but inhabit different planes, as if gravity works sideways. When someone finally crosses that empty center, a step forward, a lunge, a collapse, the movement feels like breaching an invisible force field. The audio track conceals another layer of phantom harmonics. During moments of rising internal pressure, certain low-mid frequencies from the score are phase-shifted against ambient room tones, a refrigerator hum, a distant fan, to produce faint, wavering difference tones that hover just below conscious hearing. These tones aren't fixed pitches. They beat slowly, creating a sensation of internal vibration, like a second heartbeat out of sync with your own. The effect is most pronounced in solitary scenes, the narrator alone with his furniture, staring at the ceiling, or standing in the shower. You don't hear a distinct sound. You feel a subtle oscillation in your chest cavity that syncs with mounting disquiet. It's psychoacoustic unease engineered to live inside the listener. Tom Gossam Jr.'s detective character carries an entire silent judgment in the precise angle of his head when he listens. He never nods or shakes. Instead, he tilts his head fractionally to one side, a clinical, almost diagnostic lean, and holds it there for beats longer than natural curiosity would allow. Fincher directed him to treat the tilt as a scalpel, small enough to seem attentive, long enough to feel interrogative. The posture makes every question feel like an incision. The silence that follows isn't waiting for an answer. It's measuring the gap between what was said and what was meant. The restraint turns passive listening into active dissection. The recurring pattern of nested thresholds, crossing one doorway only to face another immediately beyond it, stepping through one frame to encounter a second, builds a cumulative sense of deferred arrival. Fincher shoots these sequences with long lenses that flatten perspective, so each successive doorway appears closer than physics allows. The space contracts as you move forward. the house, the office building. Even the support group rooms are built from these telescoping portals. Every step deeper feels like progress towards something, yet the destination keeps receding. It's spatial promise without delivery, mirroring the way modern life sells endless next steps, next purchase, next upgrade, next self-improvement phase, while the core emptiness stays fixed. Contemporary conversations have begun using the film as a lens on gamified grievance, the way personal dissatisfaction gets turned into points, levels, and leaderboards within subcultures online and off. The narrator begins with passive accumulation, miles, furniture, support group stamps, then shifts to active scoring. Fights won, missions completed, rules followed. Tyler's system starts as liberation from meaningless metrics, but quickly becomes its own scoreboard. In a present where every interaction can be liked, ranked, ratioed, or canceled, the movie's trajectory from consumer points to insurgent points feels less like allegory and more like pattern recognition. One last production whisper from the edit bay. Select reaction shots were cut on the exact frame where the actor's pupils dilate. Not scripted, but measured in post using frame-by-frame analysis of lighting changes on the iris. When surprise, fear, or recognition hits, the pupil opens. Fincher used those exact dilation moments as cut points, so the edit lands on physiological truth rather than performance timing. The result is a subconscious sync. The audience feels the emotional shift in the same instant the character's biology does. It's editing keyed to the autonomic nervous system. These vectors, lateral vacuum compression, phantom chest vibrations, diagnostic head tilts, telescoping deferred thresholds, pupil-timed cuts, don't announce themselves. They resonate at different biological registers, turning the film into a tuning fork struck against your own physiology, setting up sympathetic vibrations in eyes, ears, lungs, and gut. So settle back into the current with these new resonances live. Sense the empty center pulling bodies apart. Feel the invisible heartbeat throbbing out of phase. Clock the head tilt that turns listening into surgery. Notice how every doorway promises arrival but delivers only another doorway. Catch the pupil snap that cues the cut. Let those 139 minutes circulate through you once more. They may lift a curtain on the gamified loops you've learned to run in, a fatigue at turning pain into points, a quiet dread that the scoreboard never stops counting even when the game is over.